Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8.
Keir Starmer got humiliated in Parliament for his dangerous and blind support for Palestinians.
However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong.
Labour and their cronies are selling out the British public by shamefully backing the Palestinians at our expense.
Is the current scandal that's going on. The health minister had to basically be forced to have his membership of the party suspended and his ministership taken off him as a result of some anti-Semitic things that he said.
Starmer's running scared in Labour's latest scandal that exposed their true faces.
The Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand.
Starmer's lunatic support for the Palestinians is bending British laws, and he's getting slammed for it.
The decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
The only thing Starmer knows is how to blame the previous government for his incompetence and lack of action.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts.
Kemi Badenoch shuts down Starmer's blame game and demands action, but Sosofty is too cowardly.
We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Britain is already overloaded and beyond overburdened with immigration, but Starmer's simply tone deaf.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8.
Starmer lives in a delusional fantasy land, and he's pushing a deadly agenda with his blind support for the Palestinians.
I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
Starmer and his Labour cronies are too dishonest and out of touch to understand the dangerous reality we're facing.
Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well.
British citizens deserve to be treated as a priority, but stuttering Starmer prefers woke European laws.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. he needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas.
The entire nation is tired of hearing the same old excuse and are demanding real action instead of lies.
There are very serious questions now being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for.
Starmer and his cronies are running scared as even the Labour Party is on the brink of a revolt. The woke virus that has corrupted the mind of many of our politicians is peeking its ugly head again with the Palestinian issue, and it's much more hideous than you can imagine. This isn't just about support for the Palestinians, it's about Starmer turning a blind eye to dozens of calls to violence and disgusting anti-Semitic rhetoric. Starmer and his lot of idiots are being run by their union paymasters, and the connection here is devastating as a recent scandal exposes them all to be much more sinister than we thought.
An affiliated group of people affiliated with one of the current MPs in Parliament, believe it or not, actually asked for permission to protest on October the 7th. And the belief is that that may have been knowledge that was passed to them by terrorists in Gaza, who basically said that this was what they were going to do.
Right off the bat, there's a huge red flag here that would concern anyone with an ounce of common sense. The fact that this pro-Palestinian group is connected to a Labour Member of Parliament should cause alarm already, but there's more. Right when the horrible October 7th attacks were taking place, this Palestinian group somehow knew ahead of time exactly what the terrorists were going to do and wanted to hold a rally. The obvious question is, what was this rally or protest in support for? The Palestinians or violence?
Is the current scandal that's going on. The health minister had to basically be forced to have his membership of the party suspended and his ministership taken off him as a result of some anti-Semitic things that he said. Andrew Gwynn is his name, on a WhatsApp group. There's also Oliver Ryan, a 29-year-old MP, who was also involved in that.
The scandal that exposed Labour ministers is as damning as you'd think. Private conversations were leaked where these ministers were saying disgusting and appalling things about Israelis. Their support for Palestinians is so disgracefully blind that they seem to have lost their sense of right and wrong. Then there's the very insensitive act of wanting to hold a protest right when innocent Israelis were being killed. No matter how you look at it, the ministers were rightfully booted out, and Starmer's idiotic defense of Palestinians might lead to him getting thrown out the window too.
I mean, this story about the request for the pro-Palestine march on October the 7th is a strange one, isn't it? Because am I right in saying the inference is that they sort of must have known that something was going to happen? Was it just a coincidence? What are they saying?
Yes, that's the implication behind it. What we saw, this Freedom of Information Act that came out, that delivered this information, was revealed as we saw pictures of Hamas's starving, emaciated hostages who were forced into this grotesque stage ceremony.
Considering the state of the attack that Hamas carried out on Israel, this request for a protest comes off as incredibly tone-deaf and insensitive, and it is. How on earth did they think that it was a good idea to do things like these while the world was mourning the loss of innocent lives lost in a terrorist attack? On top of all that, they're pretending to be righteous, and both Starmer and his Labour Party are defending this nonsense instead of condemning it.
It's just awful, and at the moment that they were being killed, along with other families, the PSC, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, were posting justifications. The Manchester PSC called it heroic and brave. Now, at that point, in that morning, they applied for a rally. And the videos of that rally, I think you're showing them now, they showed that they were celebratory. So the question that needs to be asked is, who exactly was this solidarity for?
If you thought this scandal couldn't get any worse, it just did. Not only were they holding protests and solidarity campaigns, many of them were justifying the actions of Hamas publicly. What happened to the British values of justice and honesty? The fact that Starmer allowed this to happen and didn't say a word against it just shows how biased he is. Not just that, when British citizens were protesting, he was calling them far-right thugs. This man has no loyalty to the British public, it seems.
And these marches have been characterised by racism. So it's really shocking that this was allowed to happen given those circumstances, and that trade unions are affiliated to this group, and that MPs are supporting them and appearing with them.
Make no mistake, this entire movement has racism at its very core. Britain stands for equality and safety no matter what the religion or race of a person is. And that means these marches should be intolerable, to say the least. Starmer and his cronies love to champion the British citizens, but their selective support just shows how hypocritical and dishonest they are. Another reason why this stuff has gone unchecked for so long is simply because the trade unions are backing them. We already know how Starmer loves his union paymasters, so is it any surprise that he lets them get away with everything?
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? Is that the marches were organised and occurred before there was a response by Israel.
Yeah.
So again, the question is, who were they in solidarity with?
Yeah.
And who are these people friends with? Why are they not banned? There are many MPs who show them support. They should all lose the whip.
Yeah, you would think so.
Here's the key detail that makes this scandal so damning for everyone involved, especially the Labour Party. The Palestinian protesters somehow knew what was going to happen before it was even on the news. Richard Tice warned Starmer about the potential link between fake aid organisations and Hamas, but nobody listened, and now we're seeing it all come true. Now ask yourself, what was the motivation behind these marches, and what were these people really in solidarity with?
Pro-Palestinian activists from the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign have faced backlash for organising a London march on October the 7th, and this coincided, of course, with Hamas's deadly attack in Israel. We know the details. Critics called the timing insensitive. It was more than that, while the organisers defended the protest, highlighting Gaza's plight. The October 14th march drew 30,000 attendees, but was overshadowed by anti-Semitic chants. You may remember Rishi Sunak condemning this. Just extraordinary.
There's a furious backlash aimed towards the pro-Palestinian activists for organising a London march on October 7th, the same day as Hamas's attack on Israel, and it's for obvious reasons. They claim to be standing up for the Palestinians, but their real intentions are clear as day. Make no mistake, these people are not actually standing up for any cause, they're only spreading hate and weaponizing the cause to further their agenda. All the while they're taking the idiot Starmer for a spin and making a complete fool out of him.
The Palestine Solidarity Campaign's reflex response to the mass slaughter of Jews on the 7th of October 2023 in real time as they were taking place was to organise a protest against the victims. And that's not solidarity, is it? That's fanaticism.
Is that how fanaticism works, then? That you kind of don't even recognise the brutality or the horror of...
Keir Starmer isn't just turning a blind eye to the extremists within his party, he's actively enabling them. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. They pretend to be a human rights organisation, but, in reality, operate as a breeding ground for anti-Israel and outright anti-Jewish sentiment. When Hamas carried out its barbaric massacre, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign didn't respond with grief or solidarity with innocent victims. Instead, they resorted to unfiltered fanaticism like absolute lunatics. And yet, instead of speaking out against this radicalism, Starmer continues to support them and bends over backwards.
Do these people just not see it? Do they not care? Are they, not wise enough to realise that, if they had any credibility in their cause, and there's nothing wrong with different causes, then this does very little to win people over?
Yeah, the facade has crumbled.
What's sad about the situation is that these people only end up hurting both sides. They're spreading hate against Israel, and in doing so, they're destroying all credibility for the Palestinian cause. At the end of the day, both sides end up suffering, and the tensions only rise thanks to Starmer's inactive and stupid approach towards the situation. If he had any common sense, he'd condemn them publicly, but of course, that's not how two-tier Keir operates. At this rate, they won't convince anyone to join the Palestinian cause, and Starmer will keep getting blasted in Parliament.
The moderate middle, those who are genuinely concerned about the care of the Israelis and the future of the Palestinians, they have been, I felt they've been relentlessly crushed on both sides. And who's doing the crushing? It's the bad faith players, the organisations that are masquerading as earnest human rights groups, who are in reality, as we can see now with the PSC, ideologically driven movements.
On the very day Hamas carried out one of the worst terrorist attacks in Israel's history, tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters marched through London. The organizers knew exactly what had just happened, but they didn't care about anything other than their lunatic woke agenda. The Tories and Rishi Sunak rightfully condemned it outright, but Labour's response was weaker, just like their leadership. All we've heard from Starmer are empty statements about the right to protest instead of a clear stance against extremism. Meanwhile, the British citizens are paying the biggest cost for all this madness.
The amount that the policing costs to put a march or a protest on, you might think somebody would go, well, yeah, you can have a march, maybe, once a year or, once a week, for goodness sake. I mean, these things were happening with such alarming regularity, and we know that the cost was tens of millions of pounds to the Met Police to do this.
These huge protests and marches don't come for free. It takes manpower, effort, and our taxpayer money to make sure these things happen safely. And we're the ones who have to bear the cost and burden at the end of the day. Rachel Reeves and Starmer keep hammering us with taxes and whining about the state of the public finances, but when it comes to cracking down on these hateful marches, they're nowhere to be seen. Make no mistake, there's a specific reason why Starmer's been so quiet and tone deaf in his support for these marches.
Is embedded in the UK's trade unions, the National Education Union, the RMT, Communication Union. I think it's probably about time now, in the wake of this shocking story, that people who pay their subs to these unions start asking themselves, what does the PSC really stand for? What do their actions and their motivations really point to? Is there a genuine commitment here?
No matter what this shambolic government does, there always seems to be something shady going on behind the scenes. In fact, we've seen time and time again that Labour's been in the pockets of the trade unions. Take, for example, the inflation-busting pay rises they gave to the unions while the rest of the nation was suffering horribly and the cost of living kept rising through the roof.
Who apparently, as Israelis were being taken hostage and being slaughtered on October the 7th, they literally, at that time, were lobbying the police, talking about wanting to have an anti-Israeli protest a few days later, not wasting any time. It's been described as ghoulish, actually, Alan. What sort of individual, as they're watching on the news this atrocity unfolding in front of them, thinks, I know what I'll do. I'll ring the Metropolitan Police and see if I can protest against the country that is the country of those victims.
The timing couldn't be worse, even if they tried. While Israelis were being slaughtered and taken hostage on October 7th, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign was already planning an anti-Israel protest. Let's not mince words and call it what it is: ghoulish, and the entire country agrees. What kind of person watches such horror unfold and immediately thinks about rallying against the victim's country? The answer seems clear.
Well, I think your viewers are sensible enough to realise that what is going on here is people who just hate Israel. That's the only purpose of what they're doing. Fancy coming into a discussion when you're starting to see people being murdered and then suggest that you should protest against that country of the people who are being murdered, the civilians who are being killed by terrorists.
This isn't about Palestinian solidarity, it's about hating Israel. The timing of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign's actions proves their true agenda. Instead of showing even a shred of compassion for the Israeli civilians being massacred, their first instinct was to push their anti-Israel stance. Liberals in crisis mode, but no amount of PR spin can cover up what their actions reveal. It's not about human rights, it's about being appalling and hateful at every opportunity.
Well, I mean, it's hideous. It's more than sinister. Let me read you some of this story. So at 12:50 p.m. On the day of the 2023 terror attack, that's October the 7th, while it was still ongoing, I mean, literally, those hideous Hamas terrorists parachuting out of the sky, murdering people at a music festival, taking hostages, as that was still happening, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign notified the Metropolitan Police that they intended to hold a protest.
While Hamas was still actively carrying out its attack, parachuting into a music festival, gunning down civilians, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign was on the phone with the Metropolitan Police planning their protest. How damning and pathetic is that for their movement? And the fact that these are the kinds of people that Starmer bends the knee to is even more shameful. This isn't about helping Palestinians, it's about aligning with those who murder Israelis.
I mean, this is absolutely hideous, isn't it? I mean, what a horrendous insensitivity. And I guess, look, they didn't realise that this would come out, I suppose, but it does tell us all we need to know, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is, once again, they have given in words what they meant, what they wanted, what they aspired to, what they intended to do, and none of it was to do with solidarity with Palestinians, and all of it was to do with solidarity, clearly, with the murderers of Israeli civilians.
Starmer's facing a huge internal revolt for this very reason, because while Israeli civilians were being slaughtered, his beloved unions were planning hate marches instead of calling for peace. At that stage, Israel had not even responded to the attacks, yet they somehow knew and were already in motion. And just a week later, the world saw their true colors. If anyone doubted their intentions before, they shouldn't now. They are hate-mongering, and Starmer's lunatic cronies are letting this madness continue.
To the sea. So again, only a few days after many Israelis have been slaughtered or taken hostage, you've got this mob, and they are a mob, shouting basically for more Israeli slaughter. ISIS flags being unfurled at Trafalgar Square, things being said and shouted and displayed, you know, things like the Star of David with a swastika.
The scenes from these marches are nothing short of terrifying and absolutely disgusting. They defile what it means to be British by spreading hate, showing symbols of hate, and chanting things incredibly disgusting that should count as a crime. Starmer was a bit too happy about locking people up for speaking against his moronic policies, but where is he now when actual hate crimes are being committed?
I mean, these are things that we all witnessed on social media, and if not the mainstream media, because of course the mainstream media, the BBC included, spent several weeks before they would even label the atrocities by Hamas as terrorism. Let's remind ourselves of exactly what was going on. And these guys, the PSC, the so-called Palestinian Supporters Club, whatever they want to name themselves, doubled down.
Here's the stupidity of it all. These people are getting away with everything. If you needed any more proof of a two-tier policing system under the hypocritical Keir Starmer, this is it. Whenever British citizens march, protest, or even post something on Twitter, Starmer's insecure ego gets hurt and he starts threatening legal actions for everyone. All the while, Sir Softy was letting convicted criminals out of prison early. It's clear that his socialist agenda is his only priority at the end of the day, and he's rightfully facing revolt for that. Labour's on the brink of collapse, and at this rate, the constant bashing will lead Starmer to finally face accountability. You can help out in dragging Starmer and his cronies to responsibility by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.